Greetings and welcome back to our daily walk through the scriptures for April the 1st, aka April Fools, aka as Mr. T says it, it's April Fools! Today's readings come in Deuteronomy chapter 21 and 22, Luke chapter 9 verses 51 on, and then Luke chapter 10 verses 1 through 12, and then you had Psalm 74 and Proverbs chapter 12. Now, it's been a little bit since we took some time off for Easter and did an Easter deal. And so we're going to jump back into Luke because there's a couple of scenes that I love. And really it all centers around the question of what does it cost to follow Jesus? I don't know that in our Western culture we fully understand or recognize the cost of following Jesus, at least in the way that they did in the time of Jesus and in the early church. Now, the early church faced incredible amounts of persecution. Some of it was government-led. Later, more like in 90 years after 90 A.D., so 60 years after Christ. But there was still persecution in individual areas, and we see that with the accounting of Saul / Paul in the book of Acts. So there's persecution happening. So Christians and actually Jews are used to persecution. So they understand when something costs something for them. They understand, I think, far better than what it is here. And so for us, though, the question is, what does it cost? What does it cost to follow Jesus? Well, I'm gonna tell you that the things that we fear, the things that we fear here in the Western culture, things like rejection, things like abandonment, or those things. These are aspects that hit here in Luke chapter 9. Rejection is the first one that we see when we pick up in Luke 9:51. I love this first verse. When the days draw near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. In NIV translation, it says he resolved to go to Jerusalem. In other words, Jesus is now understanding what's about to happen to him. He says it's time. And so he sets his face. He's determined. He is resolved. He is focused on getting to Jerusalem. And as a result of that, according to what we see here, Jesus is rejected. Now remember, Jesus has had an encounter with the Samaritan woman. Jesus has already changed a village in the Samarian in the Samaritan region, and so for him to be received like this is something of a surprise because if you live in a small town like I do, word travels. It just does. You learn about things very, very quickly. And so in a region like Samaria, word travels fast. And yet here is Jesus not being received. They say in verse 53, but the people did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. In other words, because he was going to go to Judea. And remember, Samaritans and Israelites didn't play nice. And there was racism going both directions. It wasn't just the Jews facing racism towards the Samaritans. It's obvious that the Samaritans have issues towards those that are Hebrew. So Jesus is facing rejection. And I love what James and John do here. They're like, hey, do you want us to tell fire to come down, rain down on them and consume them? You know, James and John, remember, Jesus has sent them out. The disciples have done some really cool things. As a matter of fact, in the very next verse in your reading, Jesus is about to send out 72 to go do some things. But James and John are like, oh, let's get something new going here. God, can we rain down fire? What do you say, huh? Sons of thunder strike again. Jesus rebukes them. He faces the rejection and he goes to another village. But while they were going, we see other people that have the cost of following Jesus. Someone says, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. I get to tell you firsthand experience in ministry. There are times when God moves us and we're not ready to be moved. There are times when God takes us from where we want to go. And we haven't always been excited about what that looks like because we're just wanting to be faithful to God. It's a cost. It costs us. It costs our children. It costs our family. So there is always that possibility. Here's another one. To another he said, follow me. But he said, first, Lord, let me go and bury my father. And Jesus said to him, leave the dead to bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. Now this seems like a really harsh response. Like, why wouldn't you go and bury your father? Well, here's the thing. We don't, first of all, know whether or not the dad's actually dead. There could have been all sorts of things going on. But Jesus understands a person's heart. And so Jesus' response is, perfect for that gentleman, exactly what he needed to hear. Now, for us, though, that can look like relationships that we have. It can look like what kind of relationships are we willing to set aside or let go if we're going to follow Christ. Could be unhealthy relationships. It could be relationships of a season. But what is the cost for us? And yet another one says, I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say farewell to those in my home. And Jesus said to him, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. In other words, once you go this course, you need to stay the course. You need to stick with the course. There have been a lot of people that have fallen away from following Christ because honestly, it's too hard. He calls for too much. He demands a standard that is very difficult for followers of Christ. So, there's your question for today. What is the cost of following Christ? Are you willing to face rejection? Are you willing to go where he calls? Are you willing to leave loved ones behind? Are you willing to do this with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength? Okay, there's our thoughts for the day. We'll talk more tomorrow.